I want to go back to my conversation with Professor Joleen Steyn Kotze, who's been helping me make sense of some of what has been taking place. I want to bring up, before we do that, we ask our colleagues to bring up the Western Cape for us, that before we go into that, Professor, if we just take a look at the race for votes there, it's 98.9% progress that has been made there. 59.8% is the turnout in the Western Cape, with the Democratic Alliance on the number of votes there, the 55.3%, and the ANC next there at 19.5%. But what would be very interesting is the 59.8% turnout. Prof. Kotze-Steyn, am I correct to say that the turnout, from what we see, is lower than it was in the 2019 election? So then it begs to ask the question, who went out to go and vote? Am I correct?
No, as you are having this.
Yes.
So yeah, I do think, voter turnout really does matter. We as a country do not do exit polling because, your vote is your secret and you don't have to share it with anybody. So it is very difficult, I think, for political parties as well. And if we kind of read this question in the context of some of the objections and concerns that political parties have raised, it is also an important question to determine how many people went to the polls and which party supporters actually went to the polls and cast their poll. So I've been kind of doing very colloquial research, very anecdotal research, looking at the numbers, just playing around provincially with the Western Cape, playing around with Limpopo, Northwest, Eastern Cape, various provinces. And it's quite telling for me to see that, there's been some slight fluctuations in terms of party support. Some have increased by 1 or 2%, but voter turnout seems to be a bit lower. And I think that is where the critical conversation is going to go. And also possibly in future, critical conversation that will need to happen is why out of the voting public have only, let's say for argument's sake, I'm using the current number, around 58-59% of the voting public gone out to vote. What were some of the reasons, what were some of the obstacles, what were some of the barriers of entry that may have stopped somebody from going to vote? And I'd be curious to see if the answer from the voting public is, I couldn't identify with a political party, I felt no affinity to a political party. And those are important things, because we have noted throughout the last little period in time that political affinity and feeling close to political parties have actually declined.
And isn't that because I think the general sentiment would be is that political parties only become as visible as they do during or in the run-up to elections? You see almost every prominent face in the townships, in far-flung areas, and that there seems to be a disconnect between the electorate and these political parties way before elections happen. But you see a lot of that being pushed towards, we are here, basically, when we're heading towards an election.
Exactly, and that's what I would be interested to see, if one is able to kind of get that type of research going. Do the voting public get, for lack of a better phrasing, election fatigued? Political parties are coming to their communities, different people are there, it's this campaign, manifestos, this is what we are going to do, this is, promises, this is how we're going to try and deal with issues in your community. But again, it goes back to that sustainability. In the in-between election periods,
what happens?
How are you building your party identity? How are you building your affinity to communities that you are in effect asking them to give them your vote so that you can do your job at a national level, National Assembly level, a provincial legislature level, or even a local government level.
And is that where political parties have lacked? Because a lot of what we hear, even when these political parties are doing these door-to-door campaigns, often you hear the community say, but where have you been? You only come here when you want my vote. And after that, off you go in your expensive cars, and you leave us here to deal with day-to-day challenges which no one is attending to.
That, I know, that is the interesting one, is what happens at the ward committee. So where are the party representatives at the ward committee? And again, how close do people feel to the ward representative? Because I often think we are very focused now on like National Assembly and your provincial legislatures, but building affinity, building political affinity to parties really happens at that local level. I don't have electricity today, so I'm going to go to my ward councillor. And if my ward councillor and my representative is not there, is not available, or does not deal with my issue, that starts breaking down some of the affinity I might have, or the feeling that this political party is able to deal with issues that are important to me. And then at a national election time, you want me to give you my vote so that you can deal with the bigger societal issues that may make my life better. There seems to be a little bit of a breakdown there.
Yeah. Prof, we'll chat a little bit later about this, because I also want our viewers to understand what happens. The IEC did mention that they'll be declaring these results by this weekend, so likely perhaps tomorrow. And what happens after that is I'm hoping you'd be able to share details on that. But certainly we'll come back to you a bit later on. Professor Joleen Steyn Kotze, who's been joining us to unpack some of what has been developing, of course, overnight. What is the way forward for these political parties? What is the conversation that needs to be had now?